What happens when a top U.S. official refuses to give a straight answer about the Constitution itself? That's exactly what unfolded in a fiery exchange on Capitol Hill, and the tension in that hearing room revealed something far larger than a policy disagreement. It was about power, accountability, and whether the government is still bound by the very document every official swears to uphold. For nearly a full minute, Congresswoman Lauren Underwood pressed Secretary Kristi Noem for a simple yes or no. Does the Constitution guarantee due process to everyone in America, citizens and non-citizens alike? It should have been the easiest answer in the world.
I'm going to hold off on my questions until the members have got done to see if some of them are duplicative. And so, Ms. Underwood, the floor is yours for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This weekend, the president made the remarkable statement that he, quote, doesn't know whether he has to uphold the Constitution. You, however, have taken a different position, both in your confirmation hearing and when you took the oath of office. You said that you were committed to complying with the Constitution. Do you still stand by that statement?
Absolutely. I believe President Trump
Excellent.
as well.
Let's start with Article 1, which gives Congress and only Congress the power of the purse. No money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. But this administration is freezing, terminating, and even clawing back federal grants and awards that were already signed into law. These are taxpayer dollars that were appropriated by Congress for the specific purposes that we laid out. So, Secretary, let me ask you, do you believe the administration has the authority to subvert appropriations law to freeze and terminate congressional funding?
The administration and the Department of Homeland Security used our authorities that we have to evaluate every grant that was in front of us and meet statutory requirements, but also to make sure that they were being spent appropriate.
So, of course, the president is within his authorities.
Make sure
Ma'am,
that
this
we
is my
went
time.
forward.
Thank you so much. Of course, the president's within his authorities to drive policy decisions within the bounds of federal law and the Constitution, but that's not what you've been doing. What I'm asking is whether you believe you have the authority to ignore appropriations law. Do you believe that the Constitution gives the executive branch unilateral authority to withhold funds appropriated by the legislative branch?
We have evaluated grants to make sure if they're being spent appropriately, and work that is underway and was authorized has continued. Other grants that have not been started and have not been authorized or obligated, we have reevaluated. And I think you're talking specifically about grants potentially within FEMA that were non-disaster related grants.
I'm talking
Those
broadly, ma'am,
programs are
and
being-
Article 2 does not give the executive the authority to withhold funds, period. And multiple courts have weighed in to agree. Multiple courts have ruled in agreement. Congress controls the power of the purse. That is a fact. That's not a question. That is a fact. And so if the president disagrees with certain spending, Congress passed the Impoundment Act to create a legal process to seek rescissions, and we expect him to follow the law. This administration is not just ignoring the constitutional power of the people's elected representatives. It is also violating the fundamental right of individuals. Do you believe that the Constitution grants everyone in our country the right to due process, including non-citizens?
The administration has the authority to.
Ma'am, I'm
look
looking
at
for a
how
yes or
grants are
no
spent and
question.
to
Yes or no? Do you believe the
appropriate them
Constitution?
as
Yes,
appropriate.
ma'am. Do you,
We have
ma'am?
not conducted in
Reclaiming
any
my
kind
time,
of
Mr.
impoundment.
Chairman.
Time is yours.
Okay. Secretary Noem, I'm just looking for a yes or no here. Do you believe the Constitution guarantees due process to everyone in America?
Due process is exactly what this Congress
Yes
lays out.
or
that
no?
it is, and
Okay,
the
ma'am,
tools
I'll
that
take
you
that as
give
a
us
no.
on due process
Excuse me,
is
I'm trying,
afforded to.
ma'am, I'm trying to ascertain your understanding of the law as it applies to your department. And you as its leader should be able to give us a yes or no answer, because judge after judge has ruled that the law is not being followed. Do you believe that the U.S. government has the authority to deport American citizens?
No, and we are not deporting
great.
U.S. citizens.
I'm so happy to hear that you do not believe that the law gives you that authority, because the federal government has no authority under U.S. laws to deport any American citizen. And as I know, everyone viewing this hearing today knows that several American citizens have been deported to
haven't.
date.
That is not
Secretary
true.
Noem, that was not a question. Secretary Noem, that oath that we both swore before taking office was to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, not the president, not a political party, the Constitution. And that's what we're going to keep doing here at the Appropriations Committee. Thank you. I yield back.
Yet, instead of clarity, we got evasions, half statements, and a verbal dance that left millions watching in disbelief. Because when the question is about whether the government can deny someone basic rights, hesitation is more than troubling. It's alarming. And this was just the beginning. Underwood's opening challenge set the stage for what became a striking confrontation. Her questions weren't long-winded speeches or political theater. They were direct, sharp, and impossible to dodge, at least in theory. But Noem, under pressure, seemed determined to avoid the word yes. Every response circled around bureaucratic explanations, deflections, and vague references to authority. What should have been a two-word acknowledgement, yes, absolutely, turned into a maze of political maneuvering. And that's where the real story begins. Because this wasn't just about legal definitions, it was about trust. If a leader cannot affirm the most basic protections in the Constitution, what does that say about how her department enforces the law? But that wasn't the only issue Underwood raised. She quickly expanded her questions beyond due process and into one of the most important constitutional powers Congress holds, the power of the purse. Article I of the Constitution is crystal clear. No money leaves the Treasury without Congress's approval. This isn't some minor detail buried in the text. It's the foundation of checks and balances, ensuring that no president or executive branch can unilaterally decide how taxpayer money is spent. Yet Underwood pointed out something troubling. Funds that Congress had already appropriated, money legally passed and signed into law, were being frozen, withheld, or even clawed back by the administration. These weren't theoretical dollars. These were real grants, projects, and programs intended for the public. When pressed, Noem insisted that her department had the authority to evaluate grants, to decide whether they should move forward. But evaluation isn't the same as nullifying the will of Congress. Courts have already ruled that the executive cannot block spending simply because it disagrees with Congress. And that's where Underwood's line of questioning cut through. This isn't a debate, she said. This is a fact. Congress controls the purse, not the executive branch. That moment crystallized what was at stake. If the executive can ignore appropriations, then one of the central pillars of American democracy crumbles. Imagine what that precedent means. Any president, any administration, could decide on their own which laws to follow and which to sidestep. It's not just a budget dispute. It's a rewriting of the separation of powers. And that's exactly what Underwood warned about. She reminded the committee that the framers of the Constitution, having just fought a war against a monarch who ruled without accountability, specifically wrote Article I to prevent one person from controlling the nation's finances. To see that principle bent in practice was more than a technical violation. It was, in her view, an alarming abuse. Yet Noem's responses, framed as policy discretion, skirted around the core issue. But what came next raised even deeper concerns, because the clash over money, as serious as it was, wasn't the only constitutional fault line exposed in that hearing. The bigger question, the one that left the room silent for a moment, was about due process. Underwood, clearly frustrated by evasive answers, drilled down again. Does the Constitution guarantee due process to all persons in the United States? Not just citizens, not just the favored few, but everyone? The 5th and 14th Amendments state plainly that no person shall be deprived of liberty without due process of law. The word is person, not citizen. That distinction has been upheld by the Supreme Court again and again. Yet Noem could not, or would not, say it outright. Instead, she circled around Congress's role, statutory obligations, and departmental evaluations. To viewers at home, it looked less like legal precision and more like avoidance. And avoidance on this question isn't academic. It's dangerous. Why? Because without due process, government overreach is unchecked. Imagine being detained without a hearing, deported without a chance to defend yourself, or stripped of rights because someone in power decided you didn't deserve them. That's not hypothetical. Underwood reminded everyone that U.S. citizens, born in this country, holding every constitutional right, have been wrongfully deported in recent years. Think about that. Citizens, not just immigrants, were forced out of their own nation because the government cut corners on process. Noem insisted the government doesn't deport citizens, but the record shows otherwise. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were warnings of what happens when due process is treated as optional instead of absolute. And Underwood wasn't going to let that point slip by. Her persistence highlighted the chilling reality. If due process can be denied to some, it can be denied to anyone. This was where the exchange shifted from legal sparring to something much deeper. Underwood's tone wasn't just prosecutorial, it was principled. She reminded Noem that both of them had sworn an oath before taking office. That oath wasn't to a president. It wasn't to a political party. It was to the Constitution of the United States. And the weight of those words hung in the room. Because in the end, that's what this debate is about: loyalty to principles over personalities. When officials blur that line, when they serve political pressure instead of constitutional duty, then the balance of government tilts dangerously. Underwood's statement, "The oath we swore was to the Constitution, not the President," was more than a rebuke. It was a warning that if this balance is lost, so too is the foundation of American democracy. The bigger picture here is unsettling. If the executive branch can freeze funding already passed by Congress, if officials dodge clear constitutional guarantees like due process, and if citizens can be wrongfully deported with little accountability, then what remains of the system of checks and balances? Underwood's questions exposed more than one secretary's evasions. They exposed a trajectory, one where power concentrates in the executive, where oversight is brushed aside, and where the Constitution is treated as flexible suggestion instead of binding law. That's not a partisan observation. It's a structural crisis. And once that precedent is set, history tells us it's incredibly hard to reverse. Governments rarely give back power once they've seized it. This is why hearings like this matter so much. They aren't just political theater or viral moments for social media. They're one of the few tools Congress has to pull the executive branch back into the light, to force uncomfortable questions, and to demand accountability on the record. That's why Underwood's insistence on yes or no answers matters. Because democracy doesn't survive on vague assurances. It survives on clear commitments to the law. And when those commitments waver, it's the responsibility of oversight to call it out. So what do we take away from this confrontation? First, that due process is not optional. It is the shield that protects every individual from arbitrary government action. Second, that Congress's power of the purse is not symbolic. It is the mechanism that ensures no single person decides how the people's money is used. And third, that oaths matter. When officials swear to defend the Constitution, they are binding themselves to a principle that must come before politics. These aren't abstract ideals. They are the very safeguards that keep liberty alive. As viewers, as citizens, we're left with questions that go far beyond one hearing room. Are we still a nation of laws? Or are we sliding into a system where the executive acts first and explains later? Do we hold our leaders accountable to the oaths they swore, even when they prefer to sidestep them? And perhaps most urgently, do we care enough about the Constitution to insist that it's enforced consistently, even when inconvenient? Because if the Constitution can be ignored in the small things, it will surely be ignored in the big things. And by then, the damage may already be done. If you believe these hearings need to keep shining a light on power, if you believe oversight still matters, then stay engaged. These moments may look like political clashes, but they're really about the survival of checks and balances. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because we'll keep following these exchanges, breaking them down, and showing you what they mean beyond the sound bites. Democracy only works if we all insist on it. If you value that, hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe for more. Together, we'll keep demanding accountability, because that's what the Constitution requires, and that's what the American people deserve.